Hi. Today we're going to be talking about, or right now, we're going to be talking about interpersonal comparisons of utility. Uh, okay, so last time when we looked at diminishing marginal utility, we said that only an individual knows what brings them value and what brings them utility. And then through the action axiom, people then act towards realizing that utility. So and only an individual knows what brings them utility. Therefore, you can't compare utilities between people. Most economists agree that you can't do interpersonal comparisons of utility, except when it comes to money. And so. And then that leads us to utilitarian philosophy. So let's look at diminishing marginal utility again, real quick. So here would be diminishing marginal utility for a normal economic good. And I usually like to use pizza in Sunset Park, Brooklyn, where we are right now, as a normal economic good. So here's pizza, Sunset Park, Brooklyn, a normal economic good. Where the first consumption of a slice of pizza brings you this much utility. The next consumption of a slice of pizza brings you this much utility, a little bit less. The third slice, a little bit less utility. So you get diminishing marginal utility as each unit of consumption brings you less utility. And this can also explain why the supply curve or the demand curve is downward sloping. Yes? Yes. So that's for a normal economic good, pizza. And then you substitute, an individual substitutes based on their own subjective utility, known only to themselves, substitutes from one economic good to another. And then most economists use these known and knowable and unchangeable utility functions to create mathematical equations to maximize utility, consumption, maximize utility through consumption. And, but in any case, you can't compare individual, most economists agree you cannot compare individual utilities, utilities between people, except when it comes, because only an individual knows what's best for them and they act towards that. So therefore you can't compare utilities amongst people, except many economists, and there's an exception, which is when you use money. So let's say that money is the unit of measure for utility. Now, economists now, and in applied fiscal policy and social policy, you assume that you can make interpersonal comparisons of utility if there's money involved. So let's say that this person number 3, has this much utility, right? Person number 3 has the most money and therefore has the most utility. Where this person number 1, has the least money and the least utility. right? So what, this is an excuse for the redistribution of wealth. If you believe that there's a standard measure of utility based on money, and if somebody has more money than somebody else, that you can redistribute this wealth and increase society's welfare. And that's called utilitarianism, or a social welfare function. Let me show you how that works. Again, the exception, this is an exception to economists' belief that you can't compare utilities. So this person number 3, this third bit of this amount of money for person number 3 brings this much utility. And if you would take this amount of money from this person and distribute it to person number 1 would gain that much utility. So loss to richest and gain to poorest. So what you've done then is, by redistributing from the richest to the poorest, the loss of the richest utility is less than the gain of the poorest, the gain to the poorest. So the loss of utility to the richest is smaller than the gain to the poorest. So society's overall utility increases. And that's called utilitarianism, and it's also an excuse for progressive taxation, tax the rich, and that type of thing, based on this idea, exception to the rule that you can't compare utilities except when you have the magic thing money involved. And one of the philosophical problems with this idea of utilitarian redistribution to maximize society's welfare or utility is it ignores deontology. It ignores the fact that first, deontology. It ignores the fact that at first you should do no harm. So the utilitarian philosophy of redistribution ignores the fact that at first you should do no harm. And the end result of subsidizing the poor, of course, the poor have no incentive to create wealth or be creative and become self-determining. And Edmund Phelps, a Nobel Prize winner, Edmund Phelps, the Nobel Prize winner, has an article in the New York Review of Books, What is Wrong with the West's Economies? Utilitarian Philosophies as Manifested in Policy in the Modern Welfare State has reduced entrepreneurship, human creativity, and self-determination. And that's in the New York Review of Books. So if it's in the New York Review of Books, you have to believe it. So anyway, that completes our segment on interpersonal comparisons of utility and the exception to the rule when money is involved.